Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. We are going to be discussing a very important topic, but our virtual event today is brought to you by Guide CX. This is Dave Thompson. I am the Director of Partnerships and Events here. And we have Martin Evans with, as you can see, Enerflo. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself for real quick?
Yeah, so my name is Martin. Largely, I've been doing a lot of project management at Enerflo, but I'm now leading up the data and analytics for our company, and we've learned a lot of great things as it pertains to onboarding from this data.
Fantastic. Well, we do have a lot of great stuff. I know there's been a lot of interest, a lot of reaching out, asking on this webinar series that we've got around this. So we do have the Q&A and the chat that are available. If you have a question you would like Martin or I to address as the meeting is going along, please feel free to pop that into the Q&A. The chat is also open, so we love having some good conversation back and forth, so feel free to utilize both of those. Curious where people are joining. If you guys want to get into the chat, tell us where you guys are joining us from. I think I see some familiar names, but we got Florida. All right, Jason. I was hoping it was you, my man.
See a
Kansas
couple of
City.
neighbors in there. I see Kansas City. I'm in Missouri, so they're feeling my same weather.
Hey, Berlin, Germany. All right. I will not pop in my German from learning in high school because that's been not recent. So we got Texas, Ohio. Fantastic. Well, we appreciate everybody joining from all over the place. So our topic today is, everyone saw and noticed, is how do we make onboarding a profit center? Everybody's seeing this trend of CS needs to generate revenue. We got to own expansion. But how many times are we really looking into, is onboarding something that we can generate revenue? Are we charging? Should we be charging? So we're excited to cover this topic today. We got, and again, Martin, I reached out to as a expert in this topic that's done a lot for specifically Enerflo. So, Martin, tell us what was it? Let's get kind of into the conversation. What originally started the topic for you of looking into, hey, is onboarding a revenue center? Are we doing this right? What kind of got that going for you?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. One, it is no secret that rifts are happening everywhere, right? Reduction in force. And so a lot of executives are looking for segments of the company that aren't producing, right? If we've got cost centers rather than profit centers, then what can we do to reduce those things, right? Without trying to hurt the business. The other piece of it was with Guide CX, there's a lot of available data. And so as I was looking through the platform and I was looking at some things and I was like, why are some of these fields empty and why are some of these fields populated? I started to look and started to analyze things and noticed that implementation fees generally among those partners that we were on board. Now, when I say partners here, customers, it's synonymous. The partners that we were onboarding, there wasn't a standard reason for some paying implementation fees and others not. So I just started diving into it and found some pretty interesting things.
Right on. So just in curiosity, out of the people that are on here, I would love to see how many are charging an implementation versus those that are not. Be interesting to just see what that current makeup is. I know when we started Guide CX very early on, we were not charging. I think that's a pretty common thing. And Martin, love to get your perspective. But how often very early stage startups are just happy to get customers in and signed versus trying to charge, or when that point is. I mean, we can see we so far everybody's charging. We got a startup, but Joseph, hopefully what we go over today is going to help with getting getting the conversation happening there for you of changing that status. But at what point, Martin, would you suggest or starting to explore that option of actually charging for implementation?
Well, I think there are a couple of points to think about. If your sales organization already accounts for the cost of labor that's involved in implementation, and you want to kind of just erase the concept of an implementation fee and include it in the sales process, then wonderful, right? Because now there's a line item, now there's a breakdown. Even if it's behind the curtain, your CFO knows, hey, we're accounting for those resources. But if you're trying to make your product as competitive pricing wise in the product as possible or in the market as possible, and now you're having to add an implementation fee to that, my recommendation about when to start charging that comes after a very honest conversation of, have we given a dedicated, concerted, intentional effort with quality leadership around the conversation to say we've done everything we can to optimize and make efficient our implementation process. The reason I say that is, and I'll show you some slides here in a little bit, our implementation took about 6 months. People were falling through the cracks. People were canceling because of the delays. Scope was not defined. Our scopes were not maintained. So, right, we had any type of scope that was created was blown away by scope creep because we just had this like perpetual state of work, right? And so it was a tremendous value for the customer, not a value for us. But once we were able to find the tool, and our tool is Guide CX, and able to button down our processes and make a very concerted effort to say, hey, this is our packaged offering and this is repeatable and it has quality associated with it. At that point, we were able to start wrapping numbers around it and figuring out, where do we break even? Do we just add a buffer? Do we add a competitive market rate and make it profitable? All those conversations began.
Okay, interesting. Um, I know you're going to get into this as far as your specific, well, the high level on the specifics. We can't, give up all
Right,
the trade secrets. The
right.
magician can't show how the trick happens, right? Or everybody can do it. But I know we've got a few questions. Celia actually asked, you know, how to know what to charge, differentiation of packages. I know those are going to be concepts and themes that
Yeah.
are going to be weaved in here. But interesting. I'd like to unpack that just a little bit more. You made a very interesting comment. I think most of the time, what businesses and software companies that I've worked with and worked for, implementation is a line item on the sell on the like the pricing model. It is a set aside option, and quite frankly, that's where a lot of the discounting or waiving happens. Is, hey, this
Right.
is this extra thing. How do you see that successfully working to have that just included into your sales process?
So we add it as a line item. We're not in the place of adding it to the pricing, but it is something that we talked about, right? But ultimately, as a leader in the onboarding and implementation space, I had to take a stand and have a voice for my team, right? You can't, when we start getting into things where we're evaluating, value add in the company, when we're looking at cutting resources, when we're looking at, the whole conversation around RIFs, right? Reduction in force. You can't come knocking on my door in implementation or onboarding, um, because we're not generating revenue, right? We're not selling things, we're not upselling, right? Those are on two sides of the coin from where we are, right? Sales is generating revenue. CS with our upsells and renewals can generate revenue, but implementation doesn't. So unless you give us a line item, unless you build our value into the sales conversation, or get really serious about maintaining the value on a line item as an implementation fee, then don't come knocking on my door trying to take my people away, right? And so that was kind of the idea there. So for organizations that say, hey, we want to keep it super simple, we want very few menu items, we're just going to add implementation into the cost of our product, that's a conversation that absolutely can be had. But again, to your point, if they're making it a line item And that's where the cuts come, so that the sales rep doesn't take a cut on their commission for whatever reason or however that works. Then we need leaders that are willing to stand up for those teams and say, hey, we're providing real value. Just because you cut those prices doesn't mean we put less effort in. So your pricing has to reflect that effort spent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and that I think brings up another topic that we want to definitely get into today is understanding, okay, how do you even know if that onboarding team, what is their effort? What is their lift?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is that breakdown of what you're charging, those kind of things. So, um, you know, before we get there, I'm curious as far as there, pretty much everybody, it sounds like, is charging for implementation, but there's a few that said it depends. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. How do you see, Martin, how do you see breaking down, like what implementation is one that you do charge versus one that you don't?
So historically, it was all about sticking your, licking your finger and sticking it in the wind and saying, yeah, I'll charge this one. No, I won't charge that one. Enerflow has an interesting customer base because as the solar platform, right, we deal with sales organizations and we deal with install organizations. And there can be one-to-many relationships on both parts of that. So I don't want to get so deep into our model that we lose the conversation here. But ultimately, let's say I've got a great big sales organization and they work with 4 installers, right? 2 of those installers are paying customers and 2 of them aren't. So we've got a customer that's not paying for Enerflow,
Mhm.
but we still have to do work to get them on Enerflow to be able to have the relationship with the paying sales organization. So I think historically that was, oh, don't charge them, they're not a paying customer.
Mhm.
And I'm saying, but we still put effort in to get them onboarded,
Right.
right? And this is how many hours we did it. And this was the average value of the hour of our personnel to get it done. So just getting into those conversations and talking to the sales orgs early on in the conversation saying, hey, in the relationships that you have, if you're going to onboard these partners in the future, we are going to charge an implementation fee for those things.
Mhm.
So we have completely moved away from the idea of not charging implementation fees.
Mhm.
And I think in part that ties back to kind of the title of this whole thing. How did I find $500,000 in revenue?
Mhm.
Right. So let me dive into that a little bit.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Again, with Guide CX, we were able to take this kind of ethereal concept of onboarding and tie it into exact tasks, with each task having a project duration, right? And so we had a lot of data around how to measure and build efficiencies into our onboarding process because of the tool, right? Now, plug your ears, Dave. If there are other tools out there that allow you to capture that level of detail and granularity and process capability, that's great. But the idea is having the data to be able to look at that and say, what's going on here? When I look at implementation fees generally, why am I only seeing them on every 4th or 5th customer, right? And so what I did is I said, let me look at all the hours that it takes. So, right, we've got our tasks identified. Each task has a duration. I'm able to say which tasks are internal tasks, so the Enerflow folks, versus external tasks, tasks for our partners to create. So let me take all those tasks by the number of hours with an average rate of our onboarding personnel. So that's our onboarding specialists, our project managers, and our head of onboarding. All of those rates tied together, let's just pretend it's $70 an hour. If I've got 100 hours, then I know I've got a $700 implementation. Right. And then maybe we create some t-shirt sizes with that, right? Somebody said, well, it depends on the size and depends on that. So do a small, medium, and large, right? Maybe it's a $700 average. Maybe it's a $600 small. Maybe it's an 11 or 12 or a $1,500 large. You can figure that out. I know we've charged anywhere from $1,200 for an implementation to $15,000 for an implementation. And I can assure you that was based on the size of the customer, not necessarily entirely on the fact that it took that many hours to get it done. Right. So, at the very, very, very least, understand what the costs are in your calculation. But let me get back to my story. So, I looked across all of our projects in the past. I looked at all of the time that it took to do those projects and I multiplied it out by a standard rate, right? In most software industries, the standard rate for a developer is anywhere from $200 to $250 an hour. I understand that for the most part, onboarding specialists are not developers. But if I just start at that $200 rate or $250 rate, because sometimes there are highly technical implementation processes, right? And I break that down, and what I'm looking at is the value. So it's whether it's $250 or $125, whatever that looks like, creating a market competitive rate and then multiplying those things out. I said, based on these rates, we could have made anywhere from $350,000 to $750,000 on the partners that we've done. I didn't want to make it ethereal. I didn't want to say, in the future, if we do this, we could make this. I wanted to say, this is simply revenue we left on the table by not charging implementation fees within this range on these partners that we've already onboarded based on the time that we put in.
Mhm.
And when they looked at that, they were like, holy cow. Right. So my thought was, I'm not telling the sales team how to do their job. I'm just saying, please be consistent and charge an implementation fee. It must be above this rate because this is what we're paying to onboard these partners. So add a buffer or add a profit. I don't care, but be consistent and don't shortchange my team effectively.
Right. Okay. So a, a question came in
Yeah.
along those lines. Jason asked, "Are you basing size on revenue, the deal number of licenses, users, or something, some sort of estimation of complexity of implementation? How are
So,
you basing size?"
yeah. So it's on the latter. It's based on complexity. So again, we're in the solar world, right? When we bring on an entity and they have a bunch of partner entities, we say, hey, if you have between 0 and 4, it's small. If you have between 5 and 10, it's this size. If you have this many, it's a large. We just did super generic t-shirt sizes because we can always go back and adjust that.
Mhm.
But starting a menu with, hey, this is extra small and this is medium small and this is large, small, and I mean, just too many things gets too confusing. So we just did small, medium, and large based on complexity. Again, based on the amount of time our onboarding specialists will actually have hands-on in a task, based on the durations that are defined in Guide CX. So yeah, so we could have a very expensive customer, a customer that's paying a lot of money, that could have a small implementation because they have a low degree of complexity to set up their build.
Mhm.
And on that customer, where it might only be a $700 build or it might only be a $1,200 build, they may charge them $12,000.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that, right? Because there's value in that relationship, right? So the idea is, let's get away from inconsistency. Let's get away from undercharging for the value of the services provided. And sure, if they want to have flexibility in negotiating prices, just make your bottom line, your red line, whatever you want to call that, commensurate with the effort that we're putting forward on our onboarding side.
Okay.
And
Um,
I will say, this is not the perfect magic wand system. This is not the magic bullet. You figure out what works for you. For us internally, this is what's working right now. This is driving the conversation. This is driving revenue. These are conversations that are being had pretty regularly internally, and I have every confidence that we'll update our processes in the future.
It'd be interesting too. I know what I've seen, and you guys feel free to chat in, kind of along those lines of complexity being the determining factor. Um, is there a typically a scoping call to really map out the exacts of what's delivered, how much time it's going to take, all that kind of stuff? Or is it, again, the t-shirt analogy of just a generic small, medium, and large? I don't know how many people are scoping. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that, Martin?
So this is part, you can't just turn on a lever and start charging for onboarding. It is a process driven venture here. And what I mean by that is, not only did we create these small, medium, and large templates within Guide CX so that when we have our scoping call, we can pull in the right templates and make sure we're scoping the right build for the right partner.
Mhm.
But those templates also had to exist on our sales contract. Hey, if you're coming in with this many things, then you're going to be a small here. If you're coming in with this many things, then you're going to be a medium. If you're coming in with this many things, you're going to be a large. So it's never a question of, oh, let me go talk to the onboarding team and find out how much it's going to be, and then I'll get back to you. They know from the get go. They know in that discovery conversation as they're starting to document those needs and that needs analysis, exactly what's going to be there. They deliver those costs or those prices confidently. Those get handed over in the sales handoff call to our onboarding team confidently.
Mhm.
because we've had that relationship built, right? And our sales guys are saying, hey, by the way, we've defined your scope. You're going to see lots of really shiny and exciting things that you've not opted in for at this time. If you want those, we can stop your build, process a change order, and then redo your build, but we're not going to allow scope creep in this process. So oftentimes we'll call it a phase one implementation and a phase two implementation, where you can create these things that we'll put on the back burner, but we are going to follow through with our original scope first because we're going to maintain our timelines and get you live fast. And then we're going to go back and readdress that phase two build or that phase two item.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and I think you bring up a major point, and I don't know how many salespeople there are on the call. As a sales oriented professional, that is definitely one of those. In on the sales side, it seems like there's commonly like, hey, this is just fluff. This is just something that we charge for whatever reason. And so that leads to how easy it is to discount because it's just, I don't know why it's there. So, can you talk us through how you have seen successfully communicating up to sales? This is actually what we do, and this is how long it takes. How are you working with your sales organization so that they aren't just giving it away all the time?
Yeah, so there was the real just let me put it in your face kind of thing. Initially, we were using like a Google spreadsheet to show these are all the tasks. This is how long they take. When we stack them end to end, right? Gantt chart kind of style. This is how long it takes. This is the number of hours, all that kind of stuff. But when we got into Guide CX and we were able to take some of that reporting, and I was able to show again through that kind of analysis of the $500,000 revenue that I'm not going to say we missed out on, but could have capitalized on had we had our processes in place. It was really helpful. So a lot of times people, before we got Guide CX, there was very much assumptions about how long things took, right? Our onboarding process was roughly 6 months,
Uh,
right? I'm sure there were some that were shorter. I'm sure there were some that were longer, but we were losing partners. And our sales guys were like, oh, that's so easy. I don't know why they can't just do that, right? They promise a 2 week implementation. 6 months later, customers furious. What's taking so long? So being able to lay out with data and being able to click on a task and say, look, this is the task. This is how much time it takes. And this is based on best practices, right? So we're not accounting for the slowest person on the team. We're accounting for kind of the superstar effort, right? And showing them all that goes into the build is very informational for them, right? They'll only want to sit through that once until they understand, this is a very technical lift, or this is a very big lift. So I can't discount too far, right? The onboarding fees and things like that. And so once we were able to talk through that, it helped that I was on the team that was rewriting the scope of work for our sales team. So I was able to get that in there and help them understand that. But there's got to be a very intentional conversation with sales to say, hey, look, this is what's involved,
got it.
right? If you wanted to go as far as saying, hey, like in Guide CX, I can set up a test build and just say, hey, you want to know what goes into onboarding? Here's your project. Go build out Enerflo or go build out your company for somebody, and you'll get to walk through all those things and you'll get an appreciation for the effort that's included, right? And I don't think they'll take you up on it, but they'll get the point, right?
Well, and I think it probably goes along with, again, from the sales side, if you're getting pushback from a customer, again, to Jason, your point, maintaining reoccurring revenue as opposed to a one-time,
Mhm.
onboarding fees are not, MRR or ARR. I mean,
Right,
that's just
right.
the reality, but it is money that the company can take in. So I think if what I've seen again from a negotiation standpoint is if the customer doesn't see the value of what they're getting and the effort that's put in, it does appear to them as, I don't want to pay for that. You're already
Right.
charging me, that kind of thing. So when you are charging, and if you're not charging or you're negotiating out of it, you're basically telling your customer, this isn't really as big of what we said. So when you're in the past where you saw there was a high level of waiving the implementation fee. Do
Mhm.
you see a correlation between not paying for it and a lack of engagement, a lower level of the customer being involved because they didn't have to pay anything for it?
Yes, and I think that deals in part with, so again, we brought on Guide CX as our onboarding tool. I reached out to Guide CX early on in our onboarding process and I said, what are the top three best practices for ensuring on time, on target delivery with our go live, with our onboarding efforts? And they said, one, you need to engage your partner 3 to 5 times a week. You need to engage at least three of the stakeholders at your partner's company, and you need to provide your weekly summary note, right? So when we put our processes in place, and now we're telling our customers during the sales process, you're going to have a dedicated, builder, you're going to have a dedicated project manager, you're going to be contacted 2 to 3 times a week, and setting up these best practices. Now we have more engagement. Now we have more on time, on target deliveries. So I think a lack of process led to the lack of engagement. And because of a misunderstanding around the type of engagement that happens, our sales team was just like, yeah, we just kind of throw it over the fence and they deal with it. But now that everybody's aware of how that works, there's more visibility on that. And again, it's a fight worth fighting to make sure that that's understood. Um, Customers don't mind paying for implementation because they see what they're getting, not just in the go live, but in the engagement throughout the entire process.
Yep. So I think that's a great transition. I know Adrian had asked the question around the thought of a bucket of hours line item in sales. Is that to be used for ad hoc services that don't fall within the normal scope of listed services? So it sounds like, and Brandon was interested too, is there a case where there are two different buckets, if I'm understanding the question? Should there be a charge for onboarding, implementation? Should there be a separate, almost pro serve hours for, more outside of like your traditional scope? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we do have two sources of intake, as it were, for our onboarding team. We have our new builds, and we also have professional services. So we have or we have additional scopes of work. I think I kind of separate them out a little bit. Professional services are something new and different that we create. But if we have, for example, you remember we're dealing with sales organizations and installers. If one of them brings on a new partner and they need us to do that, they'll usually talk to the sales team and then bring them back through. Historically, they've just come to us and we've just done it. And again, there's effort without compensation. But now everything goes through a sales process. Everything ends up on a scope of work. So whether it's a new build, an add-on for a customer, or professional services for example, a CRM integration or a lender integration with Enerflo, those three things generate revenue or intake for our onboarding team. So as far as the hours, I don't know that we've specifically experimented with a bucket of hours. We typically do a scope of work. We stick to that scope, we charge for that scope, and we perform the work.
Yeah,
But I can't tell you that a bucket of hours is the wrong way to go. It's just in our model, we do the scope of work. It's defined. Again, that prevents us from ending up in that perpetual state of work. But in your situation, it may be the right tool
got
for
it.
the
Well,
application.
and I can speak from our perspective. We started not charging, and then we evolved to charging kind of a flat fee as we were, evolving and learning about the best way to onboard our solution. And then as that evolved, now there's more integrations, and there's more to onboarding and more variability to it. Um, so I think that there is a great opportunity if you guys are looking at it to say, hey, are there two different things? The bucket of hours is a little bit more open-ended, right? That's the other thing too, is it opens up an opportunity to say, hey, well, implementation is this box and this many things that you're going to get you live. Now, if there's more you want to do to customize, and this is back to it depends a little bit on your solution too. If it's a pretty
Mhm.
straightforward, this is what you get, it's harder to differentiate. But the other thing with bucket of hours as an idea is the ability to actually make that ARR. Is they're looking at, hey, we are looking at post implementation, you know, all sorts of different things, integrations, rapport building, customization, all that kind of stuff. So that is another thing, Adrian, Brandon, that you could look at as two different things, as implementation as a standard, bucket of hours is a separate line item. So Adrian asked a follow-up question to that. Martin, if you want to address, do you scope pre-sale or post-sale for what you're going to charge and what they're going to get?
Right now, because much of what we're doing on the revenue side is so new, it's all pre-sales. We go through the process, we get a consultant, we get somebody on there that helps scope it out. We make sure everybody's in alignment, we get the price, we get, the payment, and then we move forward. Again, with the post sales, if you have a bucket of hours and you're just billing against that bucket of hours, then that could be considered post sales. But ultimately for us, we're just wanting to keep these scopes very defined, because now we can start to measure on those things. Maybe in the future we turn it into a 50, 100, 150, 200 bucket of hours kind of thing, and charge for those for that revenue model. But for us to have professional services is new enough that we're scoping each project.
Yeah, it'd be great to, you guys on the chat. Um, how do you do it? If
Yeah.
you aren't scoping, is that more due to a very simple, straightforward, templatized onboarding process? Again, I know, a good friend on here again, Jason. I remember working with Jason years ago. Any more complex requires a little bit more. Hey, we really got to identify what you're going to get, what it's going to take. But if you have more of a straightforward, simplified, it can easily be done before or after. It just also depends on how you feel it's going to impact your sales cycle, before and after. You want happy customers in that.
And
Um,
I think as well, our pre-sales scoping is a bit of a reaction to our historical experience of being in that perpetual state of work, right? If we go in and we just start working on something and say, hey, you can pay for it when it's done, or any other model, we really like the idea of just having that open, candid conversation at the beginning. Hey, this is what you're asking for. This is what you're getting. Is everybody on both sides happy? Great. Let's cut a check for this and move forward, rather than, oh, well, why am I at it? Can you add this? And can you add this? And can you add this? And it just gets carried away.
Got it. So something I want to come back to that we you mentioned a couple of times, and I'm sure the question is being asked out there. And Jason, we'll come back to your question real quick, but the idea of, again, how long does it take? How are you actually tracking how long it takes compared to, again, what you're charging, that kind of thing? Is there anything you're specifically doing to actually track the amount of time and effort?
So we have three templates that we use, and I should say three sets of templates, because our I think we have 6 or 8 templates total in our onboarding library, if you will. And based on the type of customer and what they're wanting to do, we pull in those templates and kind of build their project, right? We build the Legos, we grab those Legos and put them together. Every single task on every template has a duration
Uh-huh.
and an assignment, whether it's an internal or an external task. So I can easily go through Guide CX, isolate all the internal tasks. I can isolate them by project manager, because I know that typically our project managers get paid more. So I can look at a higher average value for that tasking time versus our onboarding specialist, right? Because I can isolate those as well. And now I can bring all those hours together. I can bring in kind of those ratios of PM to onboarding specialist. I can find my average value per effort there and create a value there. But to your point, every single task has a duration. And so I can easily pull all those tasks, add up the durations. And I've actually got a little sample
Oh,
chart here on my slides if we want to pull that up and take a
yeah,
look at that real quick.
great. I'm sure that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to bounce around in here. This isn't going to flow exactly like you wanted it here, but just to give you an idea. So here's some dummy data I put together. We have a PM, or a project manager, and we have an onboarding specialist. In this particular build, there are 41 tasks assigned to the PM, and there are 59 assigned to the builder. It takes an estimated 36.6 hours for the PM, 49 hours for the builder. So cost to onboard a small, medium, and large project. I think we went for this dummy data, we went with an average of like $70 an hour or something like that. And we just calculated this across. So these are, if we have this particular project takes 100 hours, or excuse me, 100 tasks at 85.6 hours. So a small project would be $3,100, $3,600, and $4,000 to break even.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want onboarding to be profitable, I need to decide, do I just want to add 10% just to cover costs, just to make sure I'm good? Or do I truly want onboarding to be a profit center? And instead of looking at $70, make it $125. Now, at the same time, if I take $100 and I do $125, is that something I can really sell in my onboarding queue? Right? If I do $250 and my sales team says I'm trying to sell it, but nobody wants to do it because our onboarding fees are too high, then obviously we're in a bad spot there. But you've got to test your market. You've got to find out what works there, but at all cost, cover your costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Don't let it be a situation where you're underselling yourself simply to try to get a customer through the door, because at the end of the day, those customers aren't going to keep your business alive if they're not willing to pay those kind of fees. So does that answer your question there as far as how
Yeah.
we arrived at that
Yeah.
conclusion?
Yeah. So essentially, it sounds like it's just basing it off of let's call it a flat rate, right? Each task should take an amount of time. So it's an assumption that it did take that amount of time, which I think is a great, transition to Jason's question around level of combination of flat rate, bucket of hours, that kind of thing. With those estimates, the kind of taken to the next level, and I'm sure Martin, you'd agree, is okay, those estimates are great, but is that
Let,
actually how it happened, right?
but
Go
let
ahead,
me step back. So
please.
with the Guide CX data, we originally had these estimates on all of our tasks, right? 170 tasks over like 8 templates. We just let it ride. Every time things got finished, there was an estimated time and there was an actual time. The reporting that we were able to see later on said, hey, on this template, these tasks have an estimated value time and an actual value time.
Mhm.
So we went with the actual value time. So I know confidently that on this project, we have 100 hours of internal tasking. Now, theoretically, maybe that only takes 25 days. But maybe this build on average goes 45 days because the external tasking is not being done on time. Again, we can't control that. We can control what we have control over, right? Our internal tasking. So we have very high degree of confidence. Now, again, am I going to sit there with a stopwatch and say, hey, PM, you took 36.7 hours? No, but we're basing this off actual completion times over time, not estimates, not licking our finger and sticking it in the air and saying, yeah, that feels right.
Yeah.
Because we had some of those. We had some tasks that we had 3 hours written on it for the duration of the task. And I'm like, that's a click. That's like 10 seconds. Why are we doing this?
Mhm.
Oh, I don't remember what our logic was, but we wanted to build a buffer. You don't build in 3 hours of a buffer, right? So we went with actual times and narrowed it down. A lot of people were scared because we were tightening things down, but ultimately it resulted in happier customers, faster turnovers, right? We went from 6 months to 31 days on our go live time average, and we're gearing toward 25, right? Because as part of our implementation fee conversation, and I'm going to kill the share here, it was bounced around on the sales team. What if we charge implementation fee times two, and then we offer to give them 25% back if they meet the 31-day timeline?
Uh,
So now they have an incentive. Hey, if I finish on time, I'm going to get 25% of my implementation fee back. And at the end of the day, because they inflated the value there, and inflated's not the right word, but as they increased the value on implementation and they were able to give that rebate, we still had profit built in. So there's lots of conversation on how sales can use this as a closing or a value add in their sales process.
yeah. So a question came up, and we'll go back to kind of, I think it came up with those two roles, a PM and an onboarding specialist.
Yeah.
Adrian had asked about the onboarding specialist. Is that a technical specialist? Is that a blanket role title, or do you break that out for to different levels of what people can do under that blanket onboarding specialist title?
So for us, we do not differentiate. Our onboarding specialist can take care of every single task in all of our templates. We train up to that.
Okay.
I suppose there could be some things. I mean, we're setting up webhooks, we're writing some queries, we're doing some degree of some technical stuff, right? But we've created enough knowledge base training content internally that we train all our onboarding specialists to operate at the same level. Um, so we don't have a technical role. Our onboarding specialist is an onboarding specialist. Our PM is a PM. One PM will manage many, upwards of 30 builds potentially, but an onboarding specialist, again, because of our capacity metrics, due to what the data we got from Guide CX, I know that there is a very finite mix of small, medium, and large projects that could be carried at any given time.
Mhm.
And to those projects, we added a point value, like 1 point for small, 2 points for medium, 3 points for large. No builder can carry more than 15 points at a given time. So as we look at, for example, from the PM metrics, how to assign projects out, and I understand we're getting a little bit off topic, but the data is so powerful in our processes to be able to make sure that we keep our go live times and our queue just cycling at a very rapid rate because we have so much accessibility to data that helps us with our capacity metrics.
Yeah. No, these are great questions, and it would be interesting to see how often you guys are that are on. If is that a single point of contact, like Martin's talking about? Do you break it out into different ones? For those that have been onboarded by us, you know that we have different roles that specialize in different things. But again, you're gonna a lot of it is defined by what your solution is, how you
Yeah,
set it up, the different variables, that kind of thing. So we're right getting to the end. So Martin, I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
sure.
Again, everybody that hopped on here, they want to know how to make onboarding a profit center. So
Yeah.
give us kind of that those last two or three things that everybody should go back and consider, talk to your leadership teams. What are the three things that should be done in evaluating how to make onboarding a profit center?
Onboarding is part of a system. So you have to have stakeholders from the system to understand what's involved, right? We had to pull in sales. We had to pull in our PSMs, right? Our PSMs are our CSMs, right? Our customer support reps, or not customer support, but customer success managers. Everybody had to come to the table to have the conversation. Okay. So first and foremost, it's part of a system, involve the system. Two, ask yourself if you've done everything possible to make your process a world-class effort. If it is, go back to the simple economics of looking how long it takes. If you don't know what that looks like, track it. Find out what your rate is, your bottom dollar rate is, and then decide whether you want to have a buffer or a profit on there, right? And then be flexible. Let it grow, let it evolve, let it become. Don't let it just sit and become stale. Constantly look at it. I would say reevaluate it every year, right? I keep going back to this idea of RIFs, right? If you lay off your entire onboarding team and now you're pulling in support specialists to be onboarding specialists, your value proposition changed. So go back and reevaluate what onboarding looks like, right? What that rate looks like. Is it $70 an hour? Is it 75? Is it 80? Right? Go back and reevaluate that and um, keep your numbers in line.
Beautiful.